So we're going to talk about Rome today. Last week we looked at Greece. This week we look at Rome. Remember, this is the 5th week, so there is a test due by Sunday night. So please keep that in mind anytime this week you can take it. Roman civilization is what we want to look at. I really like the Romans. I like to study the Romans. In fact, this semester I'm teaching a whole course, all semester, on the Romans. Last summer, I excavated at 2 Roman military forts, one in England and one in Israel. So I spent about 6 weeks digging up Roman stuff last summer. Oh, we found lots of stuff. The one in England had the best preserved things. We found, because that was a bog-like area, so we found shoes and leather straps, and you can find, we found some metal fittings, things for horses, parts of that. So, yeah, a lot of good stuff. Pottery. A brick that had the mark of the Legion on it. That was kind of nice. So I guess what I'm going to try to do is condense Rome into 2 courses. Right? And you know what I always say? I wish the Romans had taken over Florida. Then I wouldn't have to travel so far to go dig them up. That was just me. Flight to where? To Israel? Oh, it's about 15 hours, something like that. Depends if you stop. If you make stops, it's going to take you longer. But yeah, waiting. Well, we're at SEU. This is a very spiritual place. So I hope you're being spiritual. One of the things we encourage people to do is read the Bible. I heard a story about a new, I don't know, maybe one of the new students, new freshman, first-year student here, the guy who decided, since he was here at SEU and they wanted him to read the Bible, maybe he should do that. And so he thought, well, everybody says you should, in the morning, get up and kind of read something. So I'm going to try that. He'd never really done that before much. So he started to do that, and he decided the way he would do it is, I don't know what to read. So he had this big Bible his grandmother gave him, the King James version. And so he would just open it up, and he was flipping the pages, close his eyes, and he'd just put his finger down, and that would be the verse of the day. So he did that, and okay, not too bad. So it's probably 3rd or 4th day, he said, well, I'm going to do it again. He flipped it open, closed his eyes, whoop, put his finger down there, and the verse said, Judas went out and hung himself. That's not a very good verse for the day, kind of like a thought for the day. People hanging themselves. All right, I'm going to try it again. So he flips it open, closes his eyes, pressed down again, and the verse read, Go thou and do likewise. So I don't know, does that relate to history? Well, no, I guess it doesn't. I don't know. Well, here's, I guess, how it would relate. You should read things in context. Maybe just flipping through the Bible and pointing at a passage or a verse, not the best way of going about studying it. Not the best way to look at history or really anything. Be just sort of pick and choose things randomly. Well, today we want to take a look at Rome, Roman civilization. Here is a statue. I'll tell you, my wife hates this statue. She's an artiste, much more than I. She paints and draws and makes things. She makes these, they're called nittigans. They're like stuffed, well, they're not animals. They're like stuffed aliens, like 3 eyes and stuff. Anyway, they're these stuffed things, and sometimes they're animals, starfish and bears. So she makes a lot of stuff. She paints, she draws, she does needlework, she does all kinds of stuff. But she's trained as a librarian, so she's an archivist, and she did that for many, many years. When we moved to Florida, she said she wanted to teach art. I thought, really? In a public school? I go, really? To kindergarten through 5-year-olds, elementary school. So that's what she's doing. And so, I like this statue. She hates it. But, who knows more about art than me? So when we went to Rome, I made a point to make sure she saw this, the original one. She still wasn't impressed. Well, why do I start with this statue? Does anybody know what this statue, this picture of the statue, what it relates to with Rome? Ooh, wow. All right, let's go to the back row.
Romulus and Remus, when they were originally set up, kind of abandoned in the forest. Then Romulus killed Remus, and that's why it's named Rome.
Wow. All right, we'll just go home now. That's it. That's everything I was going to say. It's pretty close. Anybody got anything to add?
They were raised by a wolf.
Yes, the wolf. You don't want to leave the wolf out of it. This is a female wolf. Again, this is not a biology class, but just trust me, it's a female wolf, all right? Yeah, the king was the uncle, Romulus and Remus. He heard this sort of prophecy or whatever, that these two were going to take over and be very powerful, and he didn't like that. And so he had them thrown into the Tiber, he had them cast out, and they come up on the shore, and they're lost, and they're hungry, they're babies. Well, what comes along? A she-wolf, a female wolf, who begins to feed them, take care of them, and raises the two boys. So this is to show that, you can't kill these kids by throwing them in the water. Also to show that they are being nurtured by a wild animal. So maybe they're a little bit wild, a little bit powerful. So that's what this symbolizes. It's the boys getting ready to have breakfast. Or maybe it's lunch. Or maybe it's dinner. But kids eat a lot, so it could be who knows when. It could be 3 in the morning. The wolf's like, what did I do? How am I going to get rid of these kids? So anyway, like a lot of mothers say at 3 in the morning, what did I do? I'm sure you never will, but some mothers, I'm sure your mother didn't say that about you, of course. Okay, they're buying it. Good. Okay, let's keep going. So this is the story. He said Romulus and Remus, right? And, of course, Romulus kills his twin brother Remus, and he's the one that ends up starting the city. So this is a good thing, right? Because otherwise we would be studying Remus civilization, or Reman civilization, and the city would not be Rome, it would be Rheims. Nobody wants that. Well, what are the early influences on the Romans? Certainly the Etruscans and the Greeks. The Romans are very good at borrowing, adapting. Some might say plagiarizing. They could take an idea, take something and sort of make it their own, but copy it. And that's what they're going to do. They take stuff from the Etruscans, stuff to do with architecture and some of the religion and games and things like that. The Greeks, certainly religion and philosophy and literature. They're just copying these guys wholesale. Well, Romulus and Remus then brings up a very important date in Roman history. That is 753 BC. Why do you think that's such an important date?
When Rome was founded.
Aha! See, I can just go home. You guys just talk amongst yourselves. That's when Rome was founded, exactly, in 753. And in fact, that's when the Romans date everything They date everything in their history to that date. For example, we're in 2019. 2019 what?
AD.
AD. What are we dating everything to?
Gregorian calendar.
The birth of Christ. Yes. Everything, whether you like it or not, and some people don't, when you say it's 2019, you're referring back to Jesus. And certainly AD means Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, 2019. That's what it means. So a lot of people don't like that, so they don't use AD. What do they use? CE, Common Era. But even if we say 2019 of the Common Era, CE, you're still starting your calendar from the same place. Yeah, the birth of Christ. So, okay. Now, of course, some people say they want to use that because Jesus is not their Lord, right? The year of our Lord. Not my Lord. He's the Common Era. But, nonetheless, you can't get away from the fact, unless you want to create a whole new calendar somehow,
And make it valid.
that our calendar is based upon that. Across, well, certainly across the Western world, across much of the world. Now, in the Islamic world, they have a calendar that starts with Muhammad moving from Mecca to Medina. They call it AH. Some people, Anio Hijra or something like that. The Hijra, when he moves. The Greeks, we talked about the Greeks. When did they start their calendar? You remember? What event? What thing? Talked about it last week. I'm pretty confident we did. I know it's a long time to remember. It's a whole week ago. I mean, who can remember? What'd you have for lunch yesterday? You probably don't even remember that. You know what you had for lunch yesterday? See? Can't remember. Anybody got a guess? What the Greeks dated their calendar to? Or that you had tacos yesterday for lunch? Tacos sounds pretty good to me right now.
I had ramen for lunch.
Ron, what's that? Oh, I thought you said something. Did you say something? 5-star? What'd you say?
But I had pasta.
Oh, pasta. I thought you were going to say something about the Olympics, because that's when the Greeks started their calendar. Yeah, see, that's what you meant to
I
say.
thought that was the wrong answer, so I didn't say anything.
Oh. Well, see, don't be afraid. She said pasta. She thought pasta was the right answer. No,
Let's
she,
just say what I had for lunch.
yeah, that's what she had for lunch. Okay. Yeah, the Olympics. The Olympics. 776 BC. 776 BC. That's when the Greeks start their calendar. The Romans start their calendar 753 BC. Everything dates to that. And in fact, they had a little abbreviation that you sometimes see in inscriptions and other things. AUC. Ab Urbe Condita. Urbe, like the word urban. Ab means from. From the city being built. From the building of the city. From the founding of the city. So you figure out your years from that, okay? All right. So I think it's interesting because when you take a look at how the calendar's set up in cultures, it can often reveal what's significant to that culture. At least what has been significant to that culture. All right. Let's move on. Shall we? Yes, okay, we shall. Here's a map that just shows you, when we think of Rome, we usually think of a huge empire and a lot of territory the Romans control. That's not a bad thing to think about, but that's not the way they started. They started as just the territory of Rome and then the area right around Rome. And they will eventually fight the Etruscans to the north. They will fight and come to control the Latin tribes to the south. They'll come to fight the Samnites here. They'll eventually find the Greeks down here. And they will, piece by piece, take over that peninsula of Rome that some people call a boot. The boot of Rome. We'll put another map up in a minute. Here's another very important date. 509 BC. 509 BC is important because it is the beginning of the Roman Republic. Roman Republic. The Etruscans actually controlled the Romans for quite a while, and the Etruscans had a king that ruled over the Romans. In 509, the Romans kick out the last Etruscan king. And guess what? The Romans will never have a king again. In fact, the Romans don't even want to use the word king. Anybody know what the Latin word for king is? A good name for your son. Rex. Rex. R-E-X. Rex. That means king. I know you've heard of Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? The king of terror, the king of eating you up. That's what Tyrannosaurus Rex is going to do. But when I was a boy, I had a pet Tyrannosaurus Rex. He was kind of friendly, but you don't want to mess with him when he got hungry. Anyway, that's just how old I am. Had a Tyrannosaurus Rex as a pet. See, that was supposed to be sort of like a joke, but they say if you have to explain it, that you shouldn't explain it. It didn't work. Just let it go. So I usually do. Well, anyway, they removed the last king, the last Rex. And by the way, later on, the emperors will have a lot of titles. You'll have Roman emperors. And you say, well, aren't those like kings? Guess what? They never took the title king. They would have 40, maybe more, 50 different titles. They were the first citizen, they were the first senator, they were the Pontifex Maximus, and so on and so on. But nowhere in that long list of titles for the emperor, you will never find R-E-X, Rex. Never. They're not going to call themselves a king, because even the emperor knew that would be going too far. Because the Romans hated kings. It dates all the way back to this, 509. Even when they had an empire, they sort of tried to pretend they were still a republic. Well, they will fight different wars in the Italian peninsula to gain territory. Like they defeat the Etruscans, then later they gain control of the Latin regions. Remember, there are several Latin tribes. They get their language. Their language, again, lends the name to the groups, the tribes. As we've said, historians, anthropologists, and others will often name people in groups by their language, or group them by their language. So these people spoke Latin, but eventually Rome becomes the head of the Latin League. And of course, eventually Rome becomes the head of all of the Italian peninsula. They will fight, for example, the Samnites. The Samnites live in the mountains in the Apennines to the south. They'll fight a series of wars with them for about 50 years, 45 years. They will eventually defeat them. This is then going to put them in direct contact with the people in the south. Who are in the southern part of Italy? The Greeks. Remember last week we talked about Greek colonies. I know, again, it seems like a long time, but that might have been Thursday, which is like 4 or 5 days ago. There were Greek colonies. And the Greeks spread across the Mediterranean, especially in the north and, to the west. And they came to the southern part of Italy. They came to Sicily. They came to Sardinia, to some respects. Southern part of France. We had a map up there. Showed you some of that. Well, later on with the Greeks, remember there was a guy named, I call him Big Al, Alexander the Great. And he was able to not only consolidate all that Greek territory, but he moved and conquered the Persian Empire, and he went on all the way to India, to what today would be Pakistan and parts of India and areas to the north of that, Afghanistan and so forth, and then all the way back to Greece, a huge empire. Finally, his men said, look, how far are we going? How long are we doing this? We've been out here fighting for over a decade. When are we ever going to... So they moved back, and then Alexander and his men never went back to Greece. They went back to Babylon. He was established as the ruler there, but he dies there the age of 33. And when he dies, it appears he's dying, they ask Alexander, who should succeed you? Who should rule after you? And everyone eagerly waiting. And what does Alexander say? The strongest. The strongest. So you know what that means. Everybody's going to start fighting. And they did. Well, they do create some large Hellenistic territories, but everybody always hoped that they would be the next Alexander. They could be the one that could unify all the Greek territory. They could be the one that could take Alexander's idea and move it to the west and take over like at Italy and Spain, all around the Mediterranean. Of course, that didn't happen. But one of the guys who hoped to do that was this guy. His name was Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus came, he was over in mainland Greece, but he hears about the problems, and he was eager to come if he could defeat the Romans and could unite the Greeks in Italy under him. He thought, well, this could be the start. See, I can start to build an empire. The first big battle with the Romans, he wins. The problem is he lost a lot of troops. He lost a lot to win that battle. And so a saying is created that if you win a battle with such heavy losses that you end up losing the war, that's called a Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic victory means you won the victory, but at such heavy cost you probably lost overall. You're going to lose. Okay? That's named for him. I don't, probably not something he would like named for him, but that's the way it is. Well, eventually they will defeat the Greeks in the south and control the Greek territory by 267. Here, by the way, is an Etruscan coffin. People are buried in there, and they have these portraits up above. The Etruscans are very interesting people, by the way. We don't have much time to talk about them. The Etruscan territory is up here in Etruria. But this map shows us, where the Sabines, the Samnites, the Greeks are down here. Here's Naples, by the way, in Campania. Naples, by the way, is a Greek city. It comes from two words, Neapolis. Neapolis, or Naples. Neapolis means new city, the new city. Well, anyway, and here you can see the territory on the left. In the green colors, the Etruscans. In the yellows, the Greek. In the purple down below is going to be the next people we're going to have to talk about. And those are the Carthaginians who are in Carthage. And this would today be called Tunisia. And this would be near Tunis. Okay? But we're going to talk about them in what's called the Punic Wars. Rome is going to fight 3 wars with Carthage. By the way, Carthage are really descendants of, or ancestors, their ancestors are the ancient Phoenicians. You ever heard of the Phoenicians? What's that? Phonetics. Yeah, Phoenicians are the ones who create the alphabet. Right? They're also mentioned in the Bible in connection with a famous king. Anybody know? Solomon, yeah, Shlomo. That's his name, Shlomo in Hebrew. Solomon, yeah, he needed a navy, and the Phoenicians were great sailors. And so they worked out a deal where basically the Phoenicians would be his navy, so to speak. Well, the Phoenicians send out ships and they create colonies in the western part of the Mediterranean, in North Africa and Spain and some of the islands out that way, whereas the Greeks kind of stayed a little further north, mostly. So they were great warriors, great sailors, and they were not accustomed to losing. They're going to fight 3 wars with the Romans. Spoiler alert, they're going to lose all 3. Well, they came pretty close on the second. Anyway, the First Punic War, 264 to 241. Basically, remember, the Romans did not have a navy. They were not a naval power. They had fought basically always on land. That's all they needed to fight on. They were trying to overcome and conquer the Italian peninsula, and so you do that on land. So they were very good land warriors. Didn't know that much about fighting on the sea. They were not really sailors. But to win this war, they're going to have to create a navy, because it's an island. To get there, you got to sail there. And of course, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, are great sailors. So the Romans, like I said, are pretty good imitators, and they will learn quickly. They will develop a navy. You know, one of the things that they do you remember when we talked about ancient Greece? How did the ancient Greeks, and also the ancient Phoenicians, how would they fight with their ships? If they went into battle, what would happen? Ram each other, yeah. Yeah, so they would use the front of the ship and run it into the side of the enemy ship, right? So the boat itself, the ship itself, became the weapon or the missile, the torpedo, if you will. Right. That takes a lot of skill. You know, first of all, you got to be able to build the ship strong enough to do that. Secondly, you've got to be able to maneuver the ship in such a way that you can get it up to the right speed to ram into somebody and then to get out of there before you get stuck. Well, the Romans hadn't really developed that yet. So we see what the Romans will use a new tactic. I know you know what this tactic is. I know you've seen it. Because I know you go to movies. You like to watch what I call the movies. What's that?
Make small planks and bridges and just fight them on land.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. See, I'm just gonna let this guy. Were you listening to the last hour?
I like them a lot.
Okay, he likes Rome a lot. Yeah, you've heard of Johnny Depp, right? You ever heard of the Johnny Depp? Ever heard of the Johnny Depp movies where he's on a ship?
Yes.
Yeah? You ever heard of that? The Pirates, he's a pirate. He's a pirate, yeah. Well, yeah, what would the pirates do if they wanted to take a ship? Would they ram into it? No. Now, they did have cannons and stuff, which the Romans didn't have. But more likely for a pirate, they don't want to shoot cannons into it. They sink the ship, then you got to dive down there and try to get the stuff off of the ship. And it's much better just to come up alongside the ship. Then they would use like grappling hooks with ropes. The Romans did that too. I mean, the pirates didn't invent that. The Romans did that. And what you're calling about a plank, a gangway. They would have a plank of wood. They would drop it down. They'd have a metal spike on one end so it would kind of dig into the deck of the enemy ship. And they would run their guys across. And then they could fight like on land, hand-to-hand combat on the boat. These Carthaginians are like, wait a minute, where'd you guys go to Navy school? That's not what we do. They weren't accustomed to this kind of procedure. That was to the advantage of the Romans. And at the end of the day, if the Romans were victorious, and they often were, they got the ship. So now they got a ship they can add to their fleet. Plus, they can see how the Carthaginians construct their ship. They can see how they sort of sail their ship, and they're quick learners. They'll learn how to do that. All right? So the Romans end up eventually building much larger ships. They're called quinquiremes, which have 5 decks of oars, and the Greeks used to have how many? How many rows of oars? You remember? 3, right, a trireme. All right, good. Maybe we're learning something. Anyway, that's my goal. Well, here's the map. This shows you the territory of the Carthaginians. Notice they're all across the coastline of North Africa. Pretty much everywhere south of that is desert, Sahara. So they're in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya. They're also over here in Spain, along the coast of Spain. Set up a large city there, sort of like their second capital, New Carthage. And of course, they got these islands: Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and the other islands over here. When the Romans come down, by the way, it's very close to go from there to there. I sailed through there one time. I speak on cruise boats. And I remember on one cruise, we sailed through there twice on the way over. We were going from Spain, went to France, went to Italy, and then we came down through this, and we went all the way to Greece. On the way back, came back again. When we were sailing through that little spot right there, you could see the land on both sides of the ship. You know, I mean, it wasn't that far away. So it really sort of lets you know how close those two things are. They're pretty close. Well, when the Romans get over here and they end up fighting First Punic War, they take this. This didn't sit too well with them, with the Carthaginians. And that's going to lead to the Second Punic War. This guy is the main guy for the Carthaginians in the Second Punic War. Anybody know who the main Carthaginian was in the Second Punic War? Any ideas? I know you know the name. Because again, he's in a film. Well, not him, but somebody with his name. Ever heard of a guy named Hannibal the Cannibal? Hannibal Lecter? No, you never heard of that guy.
Yeah, he eats people.
Yes! Hannibal the Cannibal. Well, he's not a cannibal, at least no one ever accused. But his name is Hannibal. Hannibal Barca is his name. Now, if you ever have twin sons, please, name one of them Hannibal, name the other one his brother's name, Hasdrubal. This is going to be epic names. Hannibal and Hasdrubal Smith, or whatever your name is. Okay, be great. Be nobody else on the block with twin boys with those names. I can pretty much guarantee that. I don't know if I'm willing to put money on it, but I'm willing to guarantee it up to the point that I don't have to pay anything. Okay. Well, Hannibal, this war will begin in Spain. Now, you remember, when was it, a couple weeks ago? You go way back in the deep recesses of your mind to September. Oh, it still is September. Well, anyway, we talked about China. Remember we talked about a book called The Art of War? You remember that? What was one of the things that Sun Tzu said in The Art of War that you should do?
If your enemy expects you to do something, don't do it.
If your enemy expects you to do it, don't do that. Do something they don't expect. I'll tell you what, Hannibal is going to do what the Romans do not expect. The Romans figured they were going to fight the Carthaginians. They probably figured they were going to fight them in Spain. They're going to fight them in North Africa. They might have to even do an occasional naval battle with them. And if they did make it to Italy, they would come by sea and they would come over to the land and they would land in the south. Makes sense, right? So what does Hannibal do? Hannibal does not come by sea. He comes by land. He does not come to the south. He comes from the north. Hannibal marches along the coast of Spain. He marches up and through the Pyrenees Mountains, which divide Spain and France. Then he turns and he goes through the Alps, rugged mountains. He marches his men, and elephants, by the way, through the Alps. And he comes down into Italy in north in the Po River Valley. The Romans had they couldn't believe it. Here are 40,000 men with elephants and horses. These are the Carthaginians attacking us from the north by land. Caught them completely off guard. Hannibal basically embarrassed the Romans, killed a lot of Romans, destroyed a lot of land. He went for a decade around the Italian peninsula. They couldn't stop him. In part because some of the local people didn't really like the Romans either. Remember, the Romans had conquered that territory from Etruscans and Gauls and others to the north. They kind of saw the Carthaginians as, you're going to go give it to the Romans? All right, that's all right, we'll help you. We're not going to hurt you, certainly not going to fight against you. And it got embarrassing. And it got devastating because he's destroying a lot of farmland and farms. Finally, one guy named Scipio came up with an idea. His idea was, you ever heard that the best defense is a good offense? They usually say the best offense is a good defense. But he says the best defense is a good offense. And so he said, we can't beat this guy in Italy. I'm going to take my army and I'm going to attack Carthage. And when Hannibal finds out that the Romans are attacking Carthage, he's going to come, and he's going to fight us there. We'll get him out of Italy. And guess what? It worked. And Scipio will later receive the honorific title, Scipio Africanus, the defeater of Africa. Well, at least North Africa. He defeats the Carthaginians, becomes a hero. Hannibal, they just couldn't beat him in Italy with elephants. From what I understand, elephants, of course, horses are used to being the biggest thing around, right? Normally they are. Horses are bigger than most animals. Most animals. They're bigger than people, certainly. Put them out on a battlefield. The horses stand up above the people, and when they start moving, if we were outside and some horses started moving through, I bet you'd move out of the way. You don't want the horses step on you, knock you over. This is exactly why the police use them now in crowd control. If you go to an outside event, big event, you'll often find police on horses because they can see, and also, guess what? Crowd gets out of the way of a horse. Policeman's trying to walk through the crowd, might get blocked, but a horse coming through, they're probably going to get out of the way. Horse is used to that. But guess what? There's a new animal in town. It's called elephant. When an elephant comes on the battlefield, the horse is suddenly like, what? What is this thing? And when it starts coming at him, it really spooks the horse.
Elephants can be scary if you took them the right way.
And elephants can move pretty quickly when they want to.
Yeah.
Over a short term, they can run about as fast as a horse. And they're huge, thousands of pounds, and they're coming at the horse. Whew. I've heard, I don't know for sure, but I've read that once a horse has been in battle against an elephant, it remembers the smell of the elephant. And it even just smells elephants, it starts to get nervous because they don't want to have to deal with them. Well, we'll see then that they move into North Africa, and eventually they will defeat them in 202 at the Battle of Zama with the help of the Numidians. Who are the Numidians? The Numidians are people who live in the Atlas Mountains. And again, kind of like I said, probably the Gauls and the Etruscans and others sort of helped the Carthaginians in Italy. The Numidians helped the Romans because they don't really like the Carthaginians. And so they beat them in 202. That pretty much brings an end to everything. And Carthage is reduced to being pretty much just the city of Carthage with the territory around it. And they are under the thumb of the Romans. So the Carthaginians were not supposed to use any military force without Roman approval. The Numidians, by the way, are going to use that to their advantage. They're going to start causing trouble for the Carthaginians. Carthaginians will have some kind of supplies that are moving by caravan. The Numidians are going to come in and steal some of that stuff and give them a hard time. And when they even kill some of the Carthaginians want to fight back, but they have to ask Rome for permission. They ask Rome for permission, and Rome just never answers. By the way, not answering is an answer. Some people make decisions by simply inaction. If there's a deadline to something that has to be done by, and you just don't do anything, you've made a decision not to apply, not to do that thing, because it has a deadline. So this is what the Romans did. And when the decide, they get angry and say, well, we're going after those Numidians who's killing our people and taking our stuff. The Romans see that as an act of aggression. By the way, here's an artist's drawing of those elephants coming across the Rhone River. You see how they put a box up there and put archers and stuff in there? They're huge animals. What's that? Fun to ride. Fun to ride, especially when they're upset. No, not when they're upset. Well, Carthage is still, the Romans have a real bad memory about the Carthage because of Hannibal and what he was able to do in the Roman peninsula, the Italian peninsula. That was embarrassing and costly. So if you need another name for another child, here we go. How about Cato? C-A-T-O, Cato. Cato the Elder. Cato the Elder is a Roman senator. He's an orator. He's a great talker, And he did not like he hated Carthage. Let's just be upfront about it. He hated the Carthaginians. He saw them as a threat. He said, Carthage must be destroyed. That's going to be what he says. Gives you an idea what he thinks. Well, one day, the senators come in for a meeting, and they notice these platters of grapes set about, this is for us. Yes, go ahead, eat up. So they get the grapes, and they start eating the grapes, they pull off a clump, and they're sitting there, And so Cato comes up to speak, and he says, oh, did you see the grapes? Oh, yes. Well, I provided those for you. Oh, well, thank you very much for the grapes. I said, well, do they taste good? Oh, yes. Are they fresh? Oh, yes, very fresh, very lovely. Thank you very much. And then Cato said, those grapes were hanging 2 days ago in Carthage, and now they're in the chambers of the Roman Senate. What's he saying? He's saying Carthage is not that far away. If we can transport grapes here, and you can eat them and they're fresh and they taste good, so too the Carthaginians can send their troops here and be in the Roman Senate and killing us and others. And he proceeded to talk about the threat of Carthage. He proceeded to say over and over again, Carthage must be destroyed. And of course, when Carthage had set out against the Numidians the way they had, he said, see, they don't follow our rules. They're militarizing again. It's back to the old thing. You remember what Hannibal did? They're going to come and do it again. We must destroy Carthage. We should have never left them as a city. Well, Cato pushes for the conflict, and the Third Punic War begins. And it's really no contest, because Carthage really didn't have much of a military like the Romans did, and they will defeat them pretty easily. In fact, they'll destroy the entire city, burning up the buildings, tearing things down. They will even take salt and spread it on the fields. Now, I imagine it was a ceremonial thing, because salt was very expensive. But I don't know if you're a gardener. Well, let me give you one gardening tip. Don't pour salt on your garden or your flower beds or anything. Stuff's not going to grow. This was the idea, that Rome had destroyed Carthage, and Carthage was not coming back. Even the fields would not produce. And for 100 years, Carthage lay in ruins until the Romans rebuilt it. Now, the Romans at the same time are also spreading to the east. They had defeated the Greeks in the southern part of Italy, and of course they fought Pyrrhus, who was from the mainland of Greece, and so they attacked Greece. And by 148, they controlled Greece. So about the same time as the Third Punic War is going on. They're doing more than one thing at a time. However, there was one Greek city who rebelled against them, and that was Corinth. Or if you lived in Kentucky like I did for 18 years, it'd be Corinth. Corinth. 146. When they rebelled, the Romans decided to make an example of them. They destroyed every building in the city, except for one, the temple to Apollo. Out of respect for the Greek god Apollo, they left the temple standing. They tore everything else up. So by the time, 100 years later, when the city is rebuilt, it's really a Roman city. So when the Apostle Paul, for example, goes to Corinth, that's really a Roman city. Most of the Greek stuff is gone. So here we can see the path of Hannibal up the coast through the Pyrenees, down through the Alps, and then around the Italian peninsula. We can also see where the Battle of Zama is, the Battle of Cana, and Carthage. So then the Romans begin to move further to the east, taking over Dalmatia, Macedonia, Greece proper, Ionia, parts of what today would be Turkey. So you see they got a sizable chunk of land by this time. All right, so we've talked quite a bit politically. I now want to talk about the social side of this. Here in the United States, we have the idea anyway, I think it's still a true idea, although hard to achieve, is that no matter what your upbringing was, you can still achieve. Sometimes this is called the American dream. You could start off very poor and you could end up quite wealthy. You could start off with no power and you could end up with political power or economic power, right? We have no laws that deter you from doing that, as some places do. For example, if you want to be president of the United States, there's only two things, only two qualifications you have to meet. What are they? Anybody know?
35 and be a natural-born citizen.
Natural-born citizen, not you didn't come here from somewhere else and become a citizen later. That you were born in the United States. That's one requirement. And the other is you have to be 35, and that's it. Those are the only requirements. That's not much. I mean, that's a fairly low bar, I think. You don't have to have a certain kind of wealth. You don't have to have a certain. You didn't have to have. You didn't have to say, oh well, you'd have to serve in political office before, be elected, or you have to have military training, or none of that stuff. 35 and born within the United States, you can be president. Now, of course, you got to convince people to vote you in, which I guess is the harder part. But still, you could, legally. That's not the way it was in ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, they had rigid class division. They had two main divisions: the plebeians and the patricians. The plebeians were the lower class, the poor. The patricians were the aristocrats and those with the power, those who ran the government and so forth. Now, eventually, some plebeians will gain some wealth, but they can never move up. You know, here in the United States, you could have somebody, let's say they're homeless and they, destitute. If somehow they bought a lottery ticket and it won, they would go from being powerless to extremely powerful, wealthy. Because we base everything on wealth. Wealth becomes your status. You got enough money, we don't care about your background. Now, really wealthy people care about your background, but most other people don't, right? It's called old money and new money. And new money, this new money. The nouveau riche. Oh. We just can't be seen with them. Well, anyway, you get the idea. So in ancient Rome, they had these classes, and by the way, you could not change. If you became a very wealthy plebeian, it didn't mean you became a patrician. And by the way, you can't intermarry. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I'm going to marry somebody rich, and I'll be rich. By the way, that's not bad advice. Nobody else is going to give you that advice. I'm just saying, you get wealth the old-fashioned way, you marry it. That's the fastest way, easiest way to become wealthy. All right, I'll just leave it at that for what it's worth. You know, you can fall in love with someone that's rich as easily as someone who's poor. This Hollywood, I don't know. All right, whatever. There's just one person for me, and I must find that one person out of all the billions of people in the world. I don't know. Maybe. You think so? I don't know. I don't think so. But that's what we are told, right? There's just one person, and you've got to find that one person, and then you got to hope that one person, you're that one person for them too, because they may have another person that they're for, that they think they're for, that they're going after. So, what are the chances? Well, anyway. Let's make that one person a wealthy person. Why not? I'm sure your parents would not be unhappy if you married a wealthy person. It depends on the wealthy person, but, all things considered. Then they could retire and you could take care of them. That's a novel idea, wouldn't it? Yeah, I know, that's not going to happen. Anyway, all right. But it's not going to happen here. You can't marry up in ancient Rome. Now, this starts to change. And the Republic certainly is the way it is. But by the time you get to about 287, in theory anyway, a lot of these classes are gone. Want to know why they're gone? I think I'll tell you what the biggest thing is that plebeians started to get rich and some patricians started to get poor. So how are we going to solve that problem? Well, if a plebeian who's rich marries his daughter to a patrician who's poor, guess what happens? The patrician gets the plebeian money, and the plebeian, the grandsons, the granddaughters and stuff of the plebeian will now be patrician. So we both get something, right? We get social mobility, they get our money. Money infused back into them. And that's how the laws start to change. And once the marriage law starts to change, it's called the Hortensius Law, then we will see that other things begin to change. But there's still some animosity there because still it's the wealthy versus the poor. It's just that some of those old social classes begin to break down. So coming out of this, there are political parties that form. One of these political parties is for the rich and the other for the poor, to sort of simplify it. So they get replaced by the nobiles, which is where we get nobility and nobles. They start to do it based upon wealth, which is sort of the way we do it now in the United States, right? If you're really wealthy, well, let's put it this way. If you're really poor, you're probably not going to marry somebody who's really rich. There's no law against it, but it's just probably going to be very difficult to happen. First of all, you're probably not going to meet. If you do meet, you probably won't have much in common. You're going to have a fairy godmother who dresses you up, changes the pumpkin into a chariot, and whatever. And you go to the ball, and you have glass slippers. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm not saying it never does happen. I'm just saying statistically, it's pretty rare for you to marry somebody much wealthier than yourself. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Two political parties. Here they are, the Optimates and the Populares. This is my symbol for conflict. What do you think? Pretty good? I like it. The optimates basically are for the wealthy. The populares are for the poor. Now, here's the thing. If you kind of like the way things are, if you kind of like your life, and you think your life is okay, you probably don't want to change too much, right? Because if you change very much, well, things might get worse for you. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to get better. But if you don't like your life, you probably would like a lot of things and you want them to change quickly. I think both groups would say, yeah, probably eventually some things have got to change. But the one group says, let's change it slowly. Let's be very careful. We don't want to mess things up. But the other one says, hey, let's throw it all out. Let's start something new because this is terrible. That really, I think, in a nutshell, is the difference between a liberal and a conservative. Although those are loaded terms. Conservative wants to change things, but slowly, carefully. And a liberal wants to change things very quickly. Hence the underlying conflict. Now, it's also philosophical differences, but part of it's just about change. Change is going to happen. How quickly do you want it to happen? How radically do you want it to happen? Well, I want to talk about, speaking about change and so forth, let's talk about these guys, the Gracchi brothers. You know, when he came over to my house to eat the pizza, I had somebody say, hey, you know, this is pretty good pizza. Why don't you start your own pizza restaurant? Somebody said that to me, your own pizza place. Anybody here tell? I don't know who said that, but somebody said it. A couple people said, yeah, that's a good idea. And I said, look, I'm not going to do that. It takes a lot of money. Plus, how many pizza places are there? There's so many. How are you going to make it? Restaurants are like the number one thing that folds. People lose a lot of money. And you make it, you can make money, but plus it's hard work. You got to work all kinds of hours, and you may not make it. Anyway, if I did start a pizza place, I would probably call the pizza place the Gracchi Pizza, Gracchi Brothers Pizza. And I have an outline of these two guys and put it on the box or something. What do you think? Gracchi Brothers Pizza. See if anybody knows what it means. Well, the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, were the guys who were fighting for the little guy, fighting for the poor. There was one political office that was reserved for the plebeians. It had been that way after some of the reforms. It was called tribune. Patricians could not be tribunes, only plebeians. And so we see that Tiberius Gracchus became tribune. And by the way, to be tribune, you can only be a tribune for 1 year. You're not supposed to be reelected. This is another one of the rules. So while he is a tribune, he's got 1 year. He's got to try to get a lot done in that 1 year. And what he wants to do, his main focus, was to take land, public land, and to give it to people that had no land. Now, part of the problem, it may sound, oh, we got a bunch of wasted land out here, we let these other people have it. What's the problem? Part of the problem was that land, while it was public land, it was still being used by the wealthy. The wealthy were grazing their animals there. Maybe the wealthy might even be planting a few crops there. The wealthy were using the land like it was theirs. It really wasn't theirs. It was public land. So what he wanted to do is, hey, let's take that public land, let's give it to the people that don't have any land. They can grow some crops, they can have a place to live, that kind of thing. That was very radical. And so his political opponents had him assassinated while he's tribune. Now here's the thing. If you assassinate somebody, you make them into a hero. You can easily make them into a hero. Right? For example, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Right? Would John F. Kennedy be the hero that he is today? He was on coins, he got monuments, he got all kinds of stuff named for him. Would John F. Kennedy even have been reelected? I don't know. He was in his first term. But being assassinated made him a martyr, so to speak, made him a hero. And so this is what happened to Tiberius Gracchus. He became a symbol. He became a martyr for the poor. And those who opposed him said, you know what? Whew, that was a mistake. We shouldn't have done that. But guess what? 10 years later, his brother became tribune, elected, took up the same cause as his brother. And so they decided, you know what, we're going to let this guy go because you know what we did to his brother. We don't want that to happen again. So they let him be, but then when it came time for him to step down, he actually ran for office again and got elected. And of course, that was technically illegal. And so instead of assassinating him, what most people believe happened is that they said a riot broke out because he had violated the laws of Rome, and in the riot, he happens to be killed. So, wasn't assassinated. He was a lawbreaker who got caught up in a riot over his breaking of the law. Well, maybe, maybe not. Pretty convenient, nonetheless. So this is just an illustration of the kind of struggles that were there between the wealthy and the poor in the Roman Empire. The Gracchi brothers. Well, this is going to bring us up to the end of Rome, the end of the Republic. And one of the things that we see that happens there in so about a century leading up to the end of the Republic is the rise of very powerful Roman generals. This past summer I spent 6 weeks excavating Roman legionary camps, one in England and one in Israel. And, I like digging up Roman stuff. I go to visit all the Roman stuff when I can. But what brought the Roman Republic down was really the military. Because Rome had expanded so quickly, that is done with generals, and the generals become heroes, and they become well known. Also, since Rome has expanded, we then have opportunity and occasion for rebellion. Someone in Spain revolts against the Roman rule. Someone in Turkey revolts against the Roman rule. What are we going to do? The Senate says, well, we must send our Roman legions. Well, who's going to lead them? A Roman general. Who are we going to get? We're going to get somebody we know can do the job. And so they keep going back to the same ones. They gain in power. They gain in notoriety. Well, the rise of the Roman general then, we can see some of the early ones like Marius, who will rule. One of the guys who's connected with him, Sulla, becomes quite powerful. So their power really gets magnified, and they have political power. They'll also gain financial power. And then by the time you get to 60 BC, you have what's called the first triumvirate. Triumvirate has tri, right, which means three. Viras. What does that mean?
Is it true?
What?
True?
Oh, no, that's veros.
Ah.
Vir or wir means a man or a person. So this really means the three men, the three people. This is the rule of the three. Yeah, you're right. Veritas means truth. Virum means a man. So, the rule of the three. Now, what we have to remember is this triumvirate, this organization, this agreement that these three powerful generals have is completely illegal. Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar, Julius Caesar, are the most powerful generals. They're the ones who have conquered territory. They're the ones who have put down rebellion. They're also, all of them, very ambitious, very competitive. Crassus was the wealthiest and sort of the one that held the thing together, because Pompey and Julius Caesar did not get along, ever. They tried, but they just didn't. When Crassus goes off to the east and dies in battle trying to put down a rebellion, this leaves Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar as the only ones left. So you know what happens? They fight one another. You know who wins, right? Take a guess. Julius Caesar, of course. Otherwise, you would recognize Pompey's name better than Caesar's name. Julius Caesar wins. And then he gets set up as now like the sole powerful general, which is what's going to lead to him being a dictator, a ruler of Rome. So Julius Caesar had made his name. He had gone through the cursus honorum. He went up the power ladder, eventually being named famous general. He's sent to rule over Gaul. At that point, Gaul is just one small part here. But then rebellions here. He will use his army and he'll conquer all of Gaul. And he wants to become famous for it. He writes it up, called the Gallic Wars. You can still read it. Go online, you can find it. All of Gaul is made up of 3 parts. That's the way it begins. He goes through and tells you about the 3 parts. He tells you about the people who live there and how troublesome they are. And he also will tell you how he conquered them. Julius Caesar then will eventually become, like we said, the sole ruler. And in 44 BC, he is assassinated. He's assassinated by the senators. He's going into a meeting of the Senate. He's a senator as well. You know, it was the custom of the Roman senators to wear a toga, a long flowing robe-like thing. On the edges of their toga, say on the bottom edge and around the sleeves and so forth, they would dye it purple, a stripe, a purple stripe. This is dyed with a very expensive dye that's permanent. It has a particular shade of purple. It comes only from the murex shells, sea snails, that have a little bit of ink, a little bit of dye inside of that snail that they would use when they got in trouble. They would shoot it out to, like an octopus so they can get away. People discovered how to extract that. They extracted it, and then they found that it would dye the clothing a permanent purple color. So it became a symbol of the wealthy. It became a symbol, therefore, of the powerful, that they have this purple dye. You know what Julius Caesar did with his toga? He had the entire thing dyed purple. Not just the edges. The whole thing. Now this just added to the worries of those who thought Julius Caesar already had too much power. Most powerful general, now the only one left. Now he's wearing a purple toga. You know who we think he is? We think Julius Caesar is a king. We think Julius Caesar wants to be king. Rex, Caesar. We don't like kings. What are we going to do about it? Well, he's very powerful. He's got an army. Yeah, he has bodyguards. You know, Julius Caesar had a law passed that he himself, his person, was sacrosanct. That meant you could not touch him without his permission, and if you did, you could be put to death. But you know, the one place where the guards are pretty relaxed, we don't allow them into the chamber of the Senate. No one to fear there. Just us senators. And so the senators brought that day in a conspiracy. They were going to take him out that day. They brought daggers, knives, put them up into their toga so you couldn't see them. Sleeves. Cloak and dagger. You ever heard of cloak and dagger? That's what we had. They hid the daggers. And when Julius Caesar appeared in the Senate, they gathered around him, a crowd of senators. They withdrew their daggers. They began to stab him repeatedly. Again and again and again. We'll take that purple toga and we're going to make it red with your blood. And Julius Caesar fell on the ground and died. Now, according to a guy by the name of William Shakespeare, maybe you've heard of him, Bill, I like to call him, wrote a play about this. What are the last words that Julius Caesar says? Et tu, Brute. And what does that mean? You too, Brutus. And who was Brutus? His friend, right? His best friend. This is my BFF. He looks up, he sees these other senators, and then, oh, you too, Brutus? Then Caesar falls. Julius Caesar dies that day, and everything is going to change. Well, look at that. It's early, but I guess I'll let you out.